Welcome back. You're watching Live Now from Fox. Thanks for being with us on this Monday. It's June 3rd. I'm your host, Corella Lahara. I want to get now to some international headlines. First, a live look out in southern Israel. Take a look at this while I give you some updated news on the Israel-Hamas war. Today, the Israeli military, they confirmed the deaths of 4 more hostages who were held captive by Hamas. In an announcement made, the military said 3 older men who were seen in a Hamas video begging for their release were among the dead. The men were identified. The video released by Hamas in December as the 3 apparently looked weak and weary. The video was titled, quote, "Don't let us grow old here." The 4th hostage was identified as a British-Israeli citizen. Israel's military spokesman said the 4 men died together in the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis. The cause of their deaths was not immediately disclosed. I want to stick with some of the latest here, specifically when it comes to the proposed ceasefire deal by President Biden that Benjamin Netanyahu is poised to accept. Let's get to all of this from Fox News correspondent Trey Yingst.
Israeli forces are still pushing deeper into Rafah, but a deal being brokered on the diplomatic front could soon end the fighting. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reportedly told his cabinet the first phase of an American-backed plan to wind down the war can go forward. It would bring about an initial ceasefire and a limited hostage exchange with Hamas, and it's been picking up support from Israeli officials since President Biden made the announcement on Friday.
I want to thank President Joe Biden for his speech and his ongoing efforts to bring about the release of all the hostages.
Netanyahu is under increasing pressure to free the hostages and reportedly said phase 1 can begin without an agreement about what would come next. Friends and relatives of the captives now making a big push to get the deal done.
I'm here to support my government in taking this deal, the deal that Netanyahu suggested, our prime minister, that will get all our people back home.
But it won't be easy. There are elements of Netanyahu's government strongly against making any deal with Hamas. Israel's national security minister threatened to quit if the agreement is accepted. And Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told Secretary of State Antony Blinken Israel will keep fighting until the military threat from Hamas is neutralized.
We are strangling Hamas and not allowing it to continue to exist. It will not have the ability to reinforce, strengthen, and arm itself.
Gallant and Blinken also discussed the need to find a, quote, local governing alternative to run Gaza after the war. In Tel Aviv, Trey Yingst, Fox News.
All right, thank you to Trey Yingst, Fox News correspondent, for that report. A live look right now out of Gaza. I want to continue on this conversation and bring in here Dr. Benjamin Rad, lecturer of global studies at UCLA. Ben, always good to see you. Thanks for being with us. I'd like to start by something that Trey said at the end of that report that he had, which is Blinken and Galev saying that there is going to be a need for a local government alternative. So let's just talk about what that could look like, what the possible outcomes are for that.
Absolutely. So I think all sides have maintained it's not viable for Gaza to be handed back to any leadership that includes remnants of Hamas, whether it's Hamas in full or elements of Hamas leadership reconstituting in some other form. In order for Israel to feel secure, it wants all elements of Hamas removed from any future political ruling entity in the Gaza Strip. That really only leaves one viable option for now, and that would be working with the Palestinian Authority or certain officials in the authority whom the Israelis feel that they could depend on. Now, for some Israelis in the cabinet, the far-right ministers in particular, they don't see anyone viable on the Palestinian Authority side. So that's where we have a bit of an issue with what the American proposal consists of. In the absence of that, then you would have Israel maintaining ruling authority over Gaza, which I think all sides agree is not a long-term solution.
Okay, let's continue to talk about this American proposal. I'd like to bring in a tweet now from President Joe Biden. It says, "We are working for a ceasefire and hostage deal that would allow the United States and our partners to begin the work to rebuild homes, schools, and hospitals in Gaza to help prepare communities destroyed in the chaos of war. This deal must be done." And you just mentioned that still up in the air whether this deal is actually going to be agreed upon. So why does Biden and the White House, his administration, feel is different about this ceasefire deal that it could actually be implemented? I mean, it seems that we've been trying to get a ceasefire deal since the start of this war.
What's changed is that we've seen pressure from within Netanyahu's cabinet, his war cabinet. We've seen several of the ministers in particular who have given him an ultimatum, basically setting a deadline for the 6th or in a few days, the 9th, that basically if some deal isn't arranged to bring the hostages home and bring this to an end, that they're going to withdraw their support and their membership in the governing coalition. So you have the domestic pressure there. You have pressure from the hostage families who have been on a relentless campaign to get Netanyahu to agree to a deal that brings the hostages home immediately. There's no right now end in sight for that situation. And so the pressure on Netanyahu is coming from all sides to agree to this. And I think this is where the U.S., where President Biden sees more leverage than he might have a few weeks ago or a month ago.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up this notion of pressure because he is getting it from families of hostages, but pressure from all sides, like you mentioned. Some of his far-right officials, they're threatening to quit and break up the government if Netanyahu does accept this deal. So how credible are these threats, and what would happen if these officials were to follow through?
Oh, I believe those threats are real. I think that these officials, though they have prominent positions within government, for them, their ideology, their core beliefs seem to be greater than the need to maintain this governing coalition. If that were to happen, then yes, the government would topple unless Netanyahu finds other allies that he can work with to bring into the coalition to keep his position intact. But that would require, again, for him to agree to the moderate wing's proposal to go along with this ceasefire deal. So Netanyahu is in a difficult position. As soon as the war ends and the hostages are released, his government will most likely topple anyway. If he does not agree to this ceasefire proposal, he's getting threats from his right flank to topple the government. Either way, his position is untenable. But if his priority is to bring the hostages home and to bring the war to an end, then he really has no option but to go forward with what's been proposed to him.
Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is saying Israel will fight until the threat from Hamas is neutralized. However, Biden is saying that Hamas militants, they're no longer capable of conducting a large-scale attack on Israel. So what does Israel expect to see in respects to Hamas forces, and is it a realistic goal? Because as I'm sure you know, taking out a terrorist organization is much more than taking out a section or a region of a country.
Yes, and I think that the Biden administration is onto something when it says that Hamas's military infrastructure and ability to carry out operations are no longer anywhere near what they were prior to October 7th. It simply cannot do something on that scale anytime in the immediate future. However, what it can do is it can launch cross-border raids, rocket attacks, and other attacks against Israeli civilians and towns near the border. And so the concern for the Israelis is that, and for Netanyahu in particular, is not only what Hamas is still capable of doing, but that it might reconstitute itself if there is any kind of a long-term ceasefire or cessation of fighting in Gaza itself. And that remains the outstanding concern.
And it's a really valid concern. We think about the war in Afghanistan and how we had U.S. troops there for years. As soon as they pull out, the Taliban already takes control once again. So really, is there a viable way, I suppose, is the question, to make sure that that is no longer a concern? What does Israel want to see for them to have that security?
The viable way would be to empower an alternate Palestinian leadership structure in Gaza. And it would mean working with the Palestinian Authority, even though Israel or some in the Israeli government might not like the idea, might want to hold their noses when they do so. There is no other viable option short of a long-term reoccupation of Gaza, which everyone has said, and Israel agrees it's not in its long-term interest. So unless you find another indigenous Palestinian leadership coalition or structure to take the place of Gaza in Gaza, and that doesn't mean Hamas goes away, but it does mean that Hamas no longer has a monopoly on power, both military and political. That's the key, is to have it not be the only game in town, which it is as of now, or has been.
All right, Benjamin, just one final question that I want to pose to you. Netanyahu has allegedly agreed to address U.S. Congress. What do you think is going to come out of that meeting? Do you think that we're going to see maybe an end in sight to this war after that?
Yeah, and I think part of what he's going to do in that address is appeal to lawmakers to continue their support of Israel, to continue providing aid to Israel, to push back against the narrative that is being spread on many college campuses and about how Israel's been conducting the war. I think he's going to make the case directly to the American people that Israel has been fighting the war humanely and in compliance with international law. He's going to push back against the charges that have come from the ICC, from the UN, from others abroad who have said that there are war crimes being committed, that there's a genocide. I think we're going to hear rhetoric that's going to push back on some of that, and he's going to have a big audience to really use that platform and make the case. So I think he's going to take advantage of that.
Dr. Benjamin Rad, Lecturer of Global Studies at UCLA, always a pleasure to have you here at Live Now from Fox. We appreciate your insight as always, and we'll talk again soon. We'll see how this plays out going forward. I want to pull up once again that tweet from President Biden, just for our viewers in case you missed it, saying we are working for a ceasefire and hostage deal that would allow the United States and our partners to begin the work to rebuild homes, schools, and hospitals in Gaza to help repair communities destroyed in the chaos of war. This deal must be done.